Welcome everyone to this Stand Up to Racism online rally on Black Lives Matter, We Need Change. My name is Nadia. I'm going to be one of the chairs for this evening's rally. And to be honest, I really wanted to start by announcing for anyone who didn't know what's happened in Bristol today. So on the Black Lives Matter march today in Bristol, people pulled down the statue of Edward Colston. This is a Bristol-based slave trader and owner who people in the area had been petitioning and campaigning for the statue to be removed by local government, and got little to nowhere. And today, people have been fed up with waiting, and have pulled the statue down. And I think this is something, it's certainly worth celebrating, but really it shows us that, the Black Lives Matter movement, the young Black Lives Matter movement we've seen erupting first in the States, but really affecting here in such a big way, has opened big questions around wider issues with structural racism and institutional racism. And that's why I think it's important we're having this meeting today, to talk about, the fight to make Black Lives Matter. And we have a fantastic set of speakers this evening, which I look forward to introducing as they all come up. But for now, I just want to hand over to my co-chair to also see some opening thoughts.
Hi everyone, my name is Miriam and I am the co-chair with Nadia. The horrific death of George Floyd has sparked a global outcry. The glaring evidence that Black lives do not matter. President Trump, Boris Johnson, and state officials in the US, Britain, and around the world mean that for millions of people, there is no option but to rise up, demand change, and say, Black Lives Matter. The government and their friends in the media are trying to blame Black people protesting against racism for a second wave in COVID-19. We cannot stand for this. It is the government, Larry Rip, a strategy, institutional racism, and years of systematic discrimination which has led to thousands of Black people dying. The second wave has already started, and it is the government forcing people back to work that has led to it. That is why we are demanding an independent public inquiry into disproportionate impact on COVID-19 and the huge level of institutional racism that have caused it. Racism in the police force is not unique to the US. In this meeting, we will hear from people who have lost their families after police contact and who have been fighting for years for justice. We will hear from campaigners and MPs who have taken on government and police racism, and we'll talk about how we turn this movement into real change. And we want to hear from you. While this meeting is happening, we want you to tweet on the hashtag We Demand Change with pictures of your protest signs, the demand of your that you are raising, whether it's justice for Belle Mujinga, an independent public inquiry on disproportionate death, action on racism in the workplace, no more arms sale to the US, or changing school curriculum about Black history and colonialism. We want to amplify your voice and to turn this movement into something capable of defeating the racism we see and experience every day. So thank you to everyone for tuning in on Facebook and YouTube. I will be so happy to introduce the first speakers, which is Barney Hakata. He's a Cambridge Black Lives Matter protester. So please do welcome Barney.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say, first of all, solidarity with everyone in the struggle and love to everyone who's lost someone in the battle for justice. 4 days ago, we started a plan to hold a protest in Cambridge with the sole goal of making it socially distanced and still bringing the most power and with the most pressure on the government and the local community. This became the largest Black civil rights march the city had ever seen. So we're hugely proud of ourselves for achieving that. And with 4,000 to 6,000 people showed up. We managed to keep social distancing. The attendees of the protest had better PPE than our doctors and nurses and a lot of our care workers. We're very proud that we were able to keep people safe, and we believe we kept people safe. And my big message throughout the whole thing and throughout the whole of the planning of this was asking for cooperation from the community, saying that the only way that we could have this protest, and the only way that we could make a true impact and a strong impact, is by having a socially distanced protest where we all protect each other. The BAME community is disproportionately affected by coronavirus, and we took that into account in bringing people there. We understood that the people's anger was so much that they were going to come out, and regardless of whether a protest was held or not organised, people would be on the streets of Cambridge. So a small group of us, around 6 and 7 people, young Black minority ethnic people, and some white people as well, came to join our protest, came to organise the protest about 4 days ago. And it was absolutely amazing. People socially distanced, they looked after each other, people came in and were cooperative with all of the organisers, and it was the most beautiful thing to see, the care that people took for each other. And that's the message that we wanted to send. You know, Boris Johnson is pushing us out into the streets. He's telling us that we shouldn't care for each other. We should only look after ourselves, and that, you know, we shouldn't be out looking out for each other. We show every single person in Cambridge that day showed that they care about other people. They took the extra effort to risk themselves coming out and to make a statement. And along with that, they ensured social distancing. Most people came with PPE, although we did say we'd supply it. And there was a real focus on community care and cooperation, and a localized manifesto that we wanted to bring in change to the local community, addressing schools for the racisms that they've had, addressing the police in Cambridge are 6 times more likely to be searched as a Black man than a white man. And we kept these localized issues, as well as the globalized issue of George Floyd and police brutality in America, and, you know, and around the UK and, you know, Brazil. I could name 100 countries where the Afro community and the Black community experiences the most vile of crimes. But changes have already been made, and that's the positive thing that we're taking. These institutions are addressing some of the problems in themselves, and, you know, the Belle Ribeiro case being reopened has shown, you know, great support for what we're doing and what we're trying to achieve. My plan and what I want to bring forward through this movement is the kneel every Wednesday. Here we're encouraging people to take the kneel on Wednesdays, in solidarity with everyone who's lost their life and everyone who's been damaged by police brutality and racist institutions and people throughout the world. So we want to create a community feel through this kneel, and solidarity through this kneel. I'm proud to be part of this new era of protesting and this new era of civil rights. You know, right now we're living through the largest civil rights movement the world has ever seen, spreading to all 4 corners of the earth. And it is an amazing thing to be a part of, and to be taking the structural racisms and the institutions down, ripping them apart. That's the plan. We will not stop, and we will continue until all of these institutions and the makeup of these institutions are fundamentally changed, and to accommodate for all people. The fact that we live in 2020, we're 60 years on from the original civil rights movement, and we're still out pleading for the same things, addressing the same issues, is an absolute disgrace and needs to be addressed. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for that, Barney. I think it's absolutely inspiring to hear, even see the demonstrations that have been happening in places like London, Bristol, Cambridge, and elsewhere, with young people absolutely at the heart of it, and taking a lead. So it's absolutely inspiring to hear from you, Barney, and they're very powerful words. That's why I'm really excited to introduce another speaker who's been a part of the growing Black Lives Matter movement that's happening now, and touch different parts of the world, including here. Fern is involved with the Black Lives Matter movement here in London. So Fern, I'd like to bring you in.
Hiya, my name is Burt Mp. I am a part of the LDMBLM organization, and first things first, we just want to thank everyone who's gotten involved with all of the protests that we've been helping with. What we want to do as an organization is make sure that what's happening right now isn't just a moment, but it's a movement. Just to give a bit of clarity over what we have been doing, we've been restoring, caring. You know, a week ago, we were frustrated. We decided that we'll band together and we'll do something to aid. And exactly as Barney said, we saw that there wasn't enough happening to make sure that these protests were safe and could go on and minimize the risk. So we wanted to be involved and help on the back end to facilitate resources getting to the protests, legal observers and first aiders. We wanted to make sure that people had enough information and that the information they were being given was legitimate. And I guess that's where we came in. Again, I just want to thank everyone who has gotten involved with any of these protests. And, you know, I guess we can see how strongly people care about what's going on right now. And for me, I guess my involvement kind of just, it came across because I'm not able to do much. I am extremely high risk. I suffer from asthma, quite bad asthma. And so I've been stuck inside for the entire lockdown. I can't go out and protest physically. So what can I do? And for me, that was getting involved in the back end, but everyone has their own part to play. And the most important things that we can do is learn, unpack, and educate others around us. Because I think whether you are Black or non-Black, there's a lot of either anti-Black or let's say even misogyny. There's a lot of aspects of society that we absorb a lot, and there's not enough reflection on what we can do to add to the movement. And I guess us taking responsibility and accountability for some of the things that we might say to people in our lives, or just, you know, the way we interact on a day-to-day basis. If we start to learn and unpack the negative things, I guess that could have a very, very big impact on the issue itself, you know, racism. And it's something that it's definitely in all systems. It's the reason why Black people are twice as likely to die from COVID, not because it affects us any differently, not because of vitamin D deficiencies, but because there is institutionalized racism in our healthcare system. And again, one of the best ways for us to start to take accountability and change that is literally to learn, be willing to learn, be willing to unpack anything you may have as a what's the word? Anything that may stop you from making a positive choices that could affect people's lives, and start to educate others. Yeah, my name is Ferns, representing LDMBLM. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Fern, for tuning in and just tell us about, you have said something very important, which is like learning, educating and unpacking our own biases, which is extremely important. That's literally the way forward of like changing society and starting to change society, really. I'm pleased to be introducing our next speakers, a Stand Up to Racism campaigner, someone that I have the amazing privilege of working with and organizing with in the past and still now, Barbara Ntumi.
Hi, Miriam. Thank you very much to Stand Up Racism for inviting me to speak here today. I'm really sort of like energized by the movement. You know, I'm not shocked, but I'm really like surprised to see so many people come out, given this, you know, currently we have a global pandemic happening. But again, I think that's how we know that people can't wait any longer for justice. People can't wait any longer for Black lives to matter. People can't wait any longer for us to address institutional racism and the way that it impacts us, and not just Black people, the way that it impacts other communities of color. And although Black Lives Matter might be a rallying call, it might be the focal point, it's the catalyst for this movement. I think it's the catalyst for saying racism is an injustice that we no longer want to endure, whether we're Black, whether we're Asians, whether we're Arab. It's an injustice that we're no longer willing to endure. And I'm really, you know, sort of energized by the young people that are coming out, that are leading this movement, that are saying enough is enough, and that are asking for a transformation of society, but ultimately asking for justice because of the injustice that has been perpetrated against our communities. And, you know, the solidarity from across the world has been astonishing. So I'm originally from Ghana, and yesterday some comrades of mine in Accra in Ghana held a vigil for Black Lives Matter movement. Unfortunately, the police came and, you know, and dispersed them by shooting bullets, by arresting one of the leaders of the protest, even though they had informed the police and they had the right to be, you know, kind of protesting and kind of sending solidarity to the Black Lives Matter movement globally. So I think it's really important that we look beyond our borders. And I think that's what's so important about Black Lives Matter, because what started in the US as a response to sort of police violence and extrajudicial killings has turned into a global movement. Anyone, anywhere can really pick up the mantle and can really move this campaign forward. And I think it's important that we connect all the dots across the globe globally, because this is a global movement. And I'm reminded a lot by what Fanon said. He said capitalism and racism, one is cause, the other is effect. And I think that we can't stop talking about the way in which our society is ordered, the way in which, you know, we're less likely to be able to live in suitable accommodation, the fact that, you know, we're more likely to leave higher education with less, you know, the Black attainment gap is an issue, for example. I think that all those things are connected. And the thing with racism is that it manifests itself in so many ways and in so many places. And I'm really energized by the amount of young people that are wanting to be part of the movement. And I think it's important that we connect all the dots that are happening across the globe and know that actually white supremacy is ultimately the thing that we're trying to dismantle. We're asking for justice. You know, in the UK, we have to talk about migrant communities and how they're experiencing the state. For example, you know, we had the NHS charges taken away for people working in the healthcare, but people who are migrants in this country are having to pay twice in order to access healthcare. People who are migrants in this country can't even access healthcare to begin with because they're afraid, because the NHS is sharing data with the Home Office, which means they might end up being detained. So I think it's really important that we draw on all the different issues, police brutality being a really big one. It's the rallying call that we're calling it. It's the issue that we're banding around for, but I think it's one of lots of different issues that happen. And I think it's important that we make the links, the connections and the dots and the solidarity, because ultimately we're trying to topple a structure that's impacting all of us. So yeah, thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here with more, you know, stellar activists, and I'm really glad that people are really coming out and showing the support and saying that things have to change and they can no longer stay the same.
Thank you, Barbara. I think that was really clear. And I think you're absolutely right. You know, we absolutely need to be fighting to be connecting the links and making the links when it comes to different issues and aspects of racism, which is, you know, a wider reality than just police brutality, and institutional racism goes quite deep and quite far. I just want to announce that we now have across Facebook and YouTube 2.4 thousand people watching. So that's absolutely brilliant. Keep sharing, keep inviting people to the Facebook Live, start a watch party, and let's make this bigger meeting bigger and get a wider reach. Now, I'm really excited to introduce another young activist with Stand Up to Racism, Stephanie Onamade. Stephanie Onamade recently was part of facilitating and keeping together what turned out to be 500 people in a socially distanced manner taking the knee outside of Lewisham Police Station last Wednesday, really setting a model for the Take the Knee next week that everyone's organising for. So I'm really pleased to introduce Stephanie.
Thank you, Nadia. Yeah, as we've just heard, South East London Stand Up to Racism organised this protest outside of Lewisham Police Station. Socially distanced, marched chalk on the floor, everything, and it was meant, close to 500 people turned up, and that was absolutely unexpected, but not shocking at all. The protest was called obviously in solidarity with the massive protests that have erupted and the campaigns around George Floyd's death in the US. But, you know, there were lots of young people here kind of standing up and saying that, you know, the UK is not innocent. That was the second part of the protest, because there was a lot of anger in the community, especially in Lewisham, because on May 31st, this video began circulating over 6 police officers actually pinning a black woman down to the ground as she was shouting, "I can't breathe." And this actually happened before George Floyd's killing. But when you see that shocking comparison with the "I can't breathe," 3 words, and it's such powerful. This is not a moment. This will carry on being a movement. And we've seen the way that the dots are connecting. And I want to thank Barbara for what she said about the dots, because I think it's absolutely important that these local protests carry on and uniting those local issues, because that's how the network grows, and that's how we're able to decipher whenever these instances of violent, vicious white supremacy come up, such as this police brutality against this woman in Lewisham. I just want to speak a bit about the solidarity that we had from the Fire Brigades Union as well, because it's really wonderful to see in Windrush Square and in the Lewisham protest, we had firefighters just down the road taking the knee alongside of us. I really want to support the call for this to be happening every week. I think that the versatility of these protests, being able to take the knee and tweet and share that internationally, creates such a sense of connectedness over these issues. And I want to echo what Fern said, because obviously we know that the Black community is disproportionately affected by COVID-19. And for those who are saying that, you know, now is not the time to be doing this, I want them to ask why they think now is not the time, and tell the Black people who are risking their lives to be on those protests that now is not the time. Whether you are there or whether you're at home behind the scenes shielding, you're a part of this movement. I think Stand Up to Racism has really shown a way of how we can hold cavalcades, socially distanced protests that ensure the safety of our protesters and the people that we need to carry on this movement. So please keep campaigning locally around issues. You know, demanding changes to the national curriculum is completely imperative, so that children are taught about the colonialism and imperialism that we're fighting against consistently with this campaign. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephanie, for joining us today, but also organizing, being part of the people that organize that amazing social distance protest in front of Lewisham Police Station. I live in Lewisham, from Lewisham, and just to reiterate what you said, like Lewisham have one of the biggest police station in Europe, and that's in the middle of like one of the most diverse community, one of the most community that have is populated by African Caribbean, and just having a police station there just speaks for itself, right? So thank you so much for doing that, and please, I do actually call on everyone to actually join every Wednesday on Taking the Knee. Is it Wednesday or Thursday? To join to Taking the Knee. Thank you so much. I'm pleased to be introducing our next speaker, which is Charlie William. Is a co-founder of Windrush Movement Campaign and Justice for Kingsley campaign. Please.
Evening, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. As you know, I'm on the co-founder and General Secretary of the Windrush Movement UK, and also one of the founding members of the Kingsley Burrell campaign here in Birmingham, which has been running for almost 10 years next year, I believe. You'll hear more about that from my colleague and friend, Kadisha Burrell, shortly. I've been invited here today to speak about the death of my father from COVID-19 in a care home. My father has been in a care home for around 10 years. Underlying health conditions, as they say, diabetes. He's bedbound also. These are conditions he's been living with quite happily for the last several years. On Thursday, the 16th of April, our family had a phone call to say his health has deteriorated. So we was asking what exactly do you mean by that? What's happening with him? We was informed he had a urine infection, chest infection, and his health is not good at all. And so we asked if we can come to see him. We were told that, well, you won't be able to come to see him because the first floor has now been transformed into an isolation unit. And we're receiving patients from the local hospital. Patients that have recovered from COVID-19 and will be isolating in the care home for 14 days. Now, as you could imagine, this came as a shock to our family because we'd never been informed that they're going to be receiving patients who have been recovering, as we've been told, from COVID-19. We found this absolutely shocking and alarming. Fast forward to the next day, Friday, we received a call from the doctor who went to see my dad, and she asked us, we need to make a decision whether we want my father to be sent to the hospital or to stay at the care home. A difficult decision to make, but at the time, the virus was at its peak, and we decided to have our father stay at the care home, where he's amongst familiar faces that he's known for a number of years, rather than going to the hospital, the possibility of passing away on the stretcher in a corridor somewhere. I asked the care home, on Thursday, if they can test my father for COVID-19. One of the symptoms they did tell me was suspected COVID-19. So I actually asked if you can test him for COVID-19. They told me they don't have the facilities to test. Monday, 20th now, once again, I asked to have my father tested for COVID-19. The doctor said he's only suspected at this point. And I was insisting. Anyway, eventually, he gave me a call back on the Monday to say that she'll be getting my father tested. Sadly, later that day, my father passed away on Monday, the 20th of April. We still didn't know what our father has died of at this stage. It was just suspected COVID-19. After speaking to the funeral directors, we found out the possibility of still having him tested. So we pressed on forward and spoke with the coroner to get my father tested. And after some lengthy conversations, we agreed to test him. And I believe he's one of the first deceased to be tested for COVID-19. because they didn't know if it was possible or not. So he tested positive for COVID-19 while deceased. Since then, I've been doing my own research and looking for answers. I spoke to members in the care home, and there's been more others that have passed in the care home. My father is someone that is found in the care home. So as you could imagine, COVID-19 literally has to be served to my father on a plate. You know, how else can it get in there? There's now a group of us, I'm part of a group of 50 families of all died, loved ones died in the care home. And I'm asking for the MPs here, if the MPs listening here today, if they could host us in Parliament and support our campaign. The group is COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice. That's COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice. There's a whole group of us, and we've lost family members in the care home, and we need the support of all the MPs listening here today. Please contact me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlie, for joining us and sharing your story and really what you're having to go through in the fight for justice and all. Paul says, solidarity, Charlie, the care home scandal is disgusting. And I think many of us will absolutely agree with him. People, please do keep on sending your comments, keep on sharing, and please keep on sharing your thoughts with our speakers and so on, and we'll be reading them out. We are currently now on 2,800 views. This is incredibly important. You know, we need people to be part of the discussion as to where we go next from here, so that actually we don't go back to the way things were before, and things like this don't happen. I'm really glad to be introducing our next speaker, who is Kadisha Burrell. She's the sister of Kingsley Burrell, who was murdered in police custody, and is part of the Justice for Kingsley campaign. So please, everyone, show your respect and give a warm welcome to Kadisha.
Thank you very much for introducing me. For those who don't know, I'm Kingsley Burrell's sister, who died in police custody in March 2011. For the last 9 years, we have been fighting to improve the material conditions of our lives. We have fought against deaths in police custody and worked to overcome systematic racism, economic equality, and mass incarceration. Now, during a global pandemic, the impact of this bias is clearer now more than ever before. 9 years ago, what is now known as Justice for Kingsley Burrell campaign began to organise. It started out as raising awareness of deaths in police custody, whose mission was to highlight police brutality and secure justice pertaining to the 4 West Midlands police officers involved in Kingsley's death. Our intention from the very beginning was to connect Black people from all over the UK who have shared experiences, lobby MPs, members of Parliament, and raise our concerns collectively for justice to be served. In the years since, we have actively campaigned and committed to direct action to build local and national publicity in order to draw attention to injustices surrounding this case. We have accomplished a lot of publicity in the 9 years, though we have a long way to securing justice for one of the police officers, namely PCAD, has been instantly dismissed following the 5-week police misconduct hearing in December 2018. For giving dishonest accounts and not being truthful in regards to not seeing the blanket around Kingsley's face and not for removing it, as he was at the head end of Kingsley. Also, their use of excessive force amounts to gross misconduct, but the remaining 3 officers were reinstated into their work at Newtown Police Station here in Birmingham, as if they did nothing wrong, claiming that they cannot recall and do not remember seeing the blanket around Kingsley's head, despite all the NHS staff and the doctors who had contact with Kingsley actually saw the blanket wrapped around his head and heard the words Kingsley saying to them, "I can't breathe." Enraged by the death of Kingsley, we campaigned robustly on the 2nd of July 2011 to highlight what happened. Secondly, on the 18th of August 2012, to demand for his body to be buried. 18 months after he died, we had to demand for his body to be buried to the family. Thirdly, on the 31st of May 2014, to add pressures to the Crown Prosecution Service to make decisions whether or not to charge the 4 officers involved. In May 2015, we received a narrative verdict in his inquest, where his cause of death was summarized as acute mental disorder, asphyxiation, neglect, prolonged restraint, and the use of excessive force. To our astonishment, October 2017, all officers were cleared at Birmingham Magistrates Court for perverting the courts of justice and perjury, claiming they did not see the blanket placed around Kingsley's head, nor that they're hearing for it to be removed. As a result of the December 2018 misconduct hearing, the family campaign is left with no option but to schedule another demonstration, which was on Saturday, the 30th of March, 2019. This will be Kingsley's 9th year of anniversary this year, just gone March, to bring to light the systematic failures to prosecute the police officers involved. The march that we had in Birmingham 3 days ago in Birmingham City Centre, Thursday, was immense. To see the unity of the community coming out, and it's not just the voices of the families anymore. It goes to show how we are all united in this struggle, and that it's never going to end until systematic changes are made in legislation. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity, and thank you for to stand up to racism and continue your hard work.
Thank you so much, Khadija, for coming here. We're sending you our love, our solidarity, and our strength to you and your family. And please, I would like to ask to everyone, please watching us, please do get involved with Kingsley, Justice for Kingsley campaign, and every other campaigns going on in around the UK to demand justice for the families, for the victims. I would like to introduce our next speakers now, which is Belle Ribeiro Ade, MP.
Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak, Stand Up to Racism. I just wanted to start with showing solidarity to all those, the friends and family and communities of all those who have lost their lives at this particular time to police violence. I think it's really, really important that we always stress that. At the moment, all of these protests that we're seeing have been sparked by George Floyd, but there are so many people that never even make the news, nobody ever hears, they don't get a hashtag and they don't get a placard and they don't get any mention. But it's just as important that we fight for justice for them. And this is what this is all about. So we do need to bear that in mind. And solidarity with all of the protesters that are out protesting. It shows, even through the protests and even through the deaths in custody, that generally Black people are over-policed as citizens and under-policed as victims. We can see this happening. And looking at what happened with the statue in Bristol, you can already see the anger that's going to be posed around that. But what I would say is, if more effort and more resources, public resources, are put into finding those people and attempting to prosecute them than there are into, challenging people, those that have been involved in the deaths of individuals, that would be an absolute disgrace. If more resources, particularly given the 10 years of austerity, are put into attempting to dig that statue out of the river and put it back up there, that would be an absolute disgrace. And we need to be very, very mindful of that. We need to be ready to stand up to all of the excuses that are made when these issues arise. Every single time something happens like this, there are excuses made by the perpetrators. So, for example, in George Floyd's case, they were arguing that it wasn't even the knee in his neck that caused him to die. We've seen this again and again. We've seen this In this country, there's always some sort of excuse, and it always takes the family to make that step to get it challenged again. And that's what happened in this case. And that's what happened anytime anybody comes forward and anytime any sort of headway is made. But we're still seeing a situation where not a single person is prosecuted, or a single person has been prosecuted in this country when a Black person has died in the detention of the police. Now, it's important that we are, supporting our brothers and sisters internationally, across in the US and anywhere else in the world where we see these injustices. But I do get worried sometimes that I see more people coming out when something like this happens in America than we do when individuals are killed here. And it's not that there should be more or less in any particular protest. We should always be showing up for every single person. We should be doing it all the time. That is what makes us anti-racist. It's not buying into a particular hype at any particular time. We need to be doing it every single time, and we need to be fighting for justice for every single one of them. Now, we're already going to have a lot of issues when it comes to arguing about this protest. We can see people being charged in London by police horses, and we can already see that there's going to be a large crackdown on protests. So we need to be supporting people as much as we possibly can. And it is a worry. So to all those that are doing it socially distanced, I commend you and ask you to keep doing that. But we do have to remember that when they do come out and condemn us, there are loads of people that have been sitting on the beaches this weekend, and no one's asking them any particular questions. And not just that, it's really, really hard for anybody to be expected to follow the government's advice when they allow Dominic Cummings to go around and do whatever he wants to do. And we find out that actually, again, Black people being over-policed in this country are more likely to be fined during this coronavirus period. So as well as being more likely to die, they're more likely to be fined. And with that, I think the amount of anger that we're having at this moment around these protests isn't just because of the deaths in custody, but also because of what's happening with the coronavirus and the fact that more Black people are likely to die. Now, with this, we are seeing again the excuses that often come in this situation. It's comorbidities, it's our fault, we've got diabetes, we've got high blood pressure. And yes, we do have these things in the community. But however, when you remove all of those factors, we are still up to 2 times more likely to die. And it's been absolutely disgraceful that even with this knowledge, even with everything that they know about what's happening, they haven't made any attempts to protect people in the Black community. So when they knew that elderly people were going to get sick, they immediately said, we need to shield them. When they knew that people with diabetes were going to get sick, they said, we need to shield them. When they found out that Black people were going to get sick, they had a review. After the review, they made no recommendations, and then they've come down to a situation where they're saying they're going to look into it. Why, when it comes to Black people, are they going to look into it? It's really, really important that we challenge that. We continue to protest at this time. And in conclusion, what I would say is it is really important that everyone's coming out. It is really important that everyone's showing solidarity at this moment in time, but we can't let it be just a moment in time. I get worried when I see situations where people may flash up and come out and go and protest in these situations, and then you don't see them again. If you want to be an anti-racist, if you're saying you're an anti-racist, you need to be about it every single day in every single thing you do, not just at one point in time and not just for a few protests. Thank you.
Thank you for that so much, Belle. And I think you raise a really important point when you're talking about actually anti-racism. Is about what we're doing every day. It's about what we're addressing in the society that we're living in, not just the flashpoints of what's going on and so on. And in particular, I think you're right that actually we need big responses when we see police brutality and so on here in the UK, because as our previous speakers have said, it does happen here. I'd just like to read out some comments that people have left. So Fiona says, no justice, no peace. And Bethany says, Kingsley Burrell, say his name. Netta also says, sorry for your loss, Khadija. And Marge says, so sorry, Charlie. Sorry, we have some more comments here. Yeah, we've also got a comment from Maz saying that the death of Kingsley is horrific, sending my love, and thank you for sharing, Khadija. Thank you everyone for leaving your comments. Please do carry on leaving your thoughts with us and so on. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is Roxana Fayez, who is the mayor in Newham. And so I'm going to hand over to Roxana to share her thoughts with us on this subject.
Thank you very much, Nadia. And firstly, my profound condolences to Charlie for the loss of your father. The scandal that is the care home situation during this COVID pandemic rightly needs to be investigated thoroughly. And similarly, my solidarity with Khadisha, who still, after all these years, like so many families in this country, are trying to achieve justice for the death of your family member in the hands of the police. And we know, in a similar vein to the death of George Floyd, who over a period of 8 minutes and 47 seconds, his life was extracted from him as a consequence of police brutality. There has been an issue of real contention for so many years over in the States, and it didn't just start with the disturbances or the unrest or the protests back in 2014, which initiated or launched the Black Lives Matter movement. There's been so many deaths in between, not only here in the States, but also here in the UK. And over recent years, I've been involved in 2 family justice campaigns, one in Newham, Edson Bacosta, the 24-year-old who was apprehended by police and subsequently died. He was stripped naked, and in similar circumstances to George Floyd, you could hear witnesses screaming at the police at the time, that really fateful evening, saying to them, "You're killing him, you need to get off." And they were using similar tactics as the ones that we've seen in that awful, horrific video. I also wanted to commend the brother from the London Black Lives Matter movement, who talked about this as a movement, but it has to be a movement. And for me, it reflects the new era of civil rights activism and the fight for racial justice and race equality that I and many others on this Zoom chat have been part of going back decades. And my first introduction to the civil rights movement here in the UK was way back when there was the launch of the Future of Multi-Ethnic Britain, the Stephen Lawrence campaign, and to see these issues still manifest in the grotesque way that we do is another rallying cry for us to never give up and to always remain hopeful that despite the setbacks, our time will come and our cause for justice will prevail. The movement has thrown up a whole series of issues, not least the issues of the inequities the COVID-19 pandemic has brought into sharp focus here in the UK. The horror of observing the early signs the ethnic minority members of our community here in Newham, but also elsewhere in the country, were much more pronounced in the numbers of those being infected early on and those that had died. I think from my understanding, presently some 100 healthcare workers have died as a consequence of being on the front line and saving lives. But these were, frontline workers who are ethnic minority. I think the whitewash that was the Public Health England report published earlier this week was farcical. And as a consequence, like Diane Abbott, like Belle, like many others, continue to demand for an independent public inquiry into issues of disproportionality when it comes to ethnic minorities and infection rates and deaths as a consequence of COVID-19. But the worst is also the fact that this government that has been overseeing the management and the response to COVID-19 has miserably failed. It has been advised years back that we weren't sufficiently prepared, and the last 3 months and the period since lockdown has highlighted the lack of preparation and the failure to outrageous effect. We need to continue with the movement to bring to the fore issues of equity and racial justice as we progress and begin to think about how we navigate this new COVID-19 world that we're going to be living in for a long time to come. And it is going to be a long time. We are nowhere near a vaccine, and we are going to need to think about the ways in which we rebuild our communities and our society. And that absolutely has to have at its core a commitment, which has been a long-standing commitment and a demand from many of us on this Zoom chat, for racial equality and racial justice to be at the heart of any recovery and any plans. Most recently, I've been thinking about the approaches that we need to be addressing and taking forward, and that absolutely includes bringing to the fore issues of health inequalities. And I look forward to working with everyone here and across the country to ensure that they remain a priority for our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roxana, for your talk. It's very important that local government, as well as central government, get involved in this fight and these campaigns. I'm just going to share some comments. A lot of people are energized. Cam said, hashtag we demand change. The role of Britain in slavery and colonialism must be taught in schools. It must be taught that the debt the state constructed with itself to repay slaves' owner for their loss when slavery was abolished was paid by taxpayers till 2015. Alan says systematic change is needed. Any justice, Russian Shah, say 2.9K on Facebook and YouTube. That's amazing. Basically, stand up to racism just showing a new way of like organizing and getting involved while in lockdown and while trying to take care of ourselves. I'm pleased to be introducing our next speakers, which is Roger Mackenzie from Unison, Assistant General Secretary. Please, I will give it to Roger to come and share his thoughts.
Thank you so much for the invitation to join you this evening. I'm really inspired by all the speakers who've been on already. I want to give my solidarity to all the campaigns that are represented at this meeting, but mainly to all the people who have stood up and have organised and have put themselves at risk, actually, put themselves at risk by standing up and organising and making their voices heard against racism. I haven't got very long, so there's just a couple of points that I do want to make. I think that we have to be really clear that we're dealing with two pandemics. We're talking about one that started early on this year, but we're also talking about another pandemic that's been going on for hundreds of years. And we have to demand the same level of commitment to fighting the pandemic that people on this call and people in our communities, the Black communities, have been experiencing for 500 years or more. Because I think that's at the core of all this. And lots of things that people have said during this, this conversation this evening have kind of emphasized that we're not just talking about what happened to George Floyd. We're not just talking about what happened to Ahmaud Arbery. We're not just talking about to all the hundreds, actually, of events, atrocities that have taken place in the UK. We're talking about the systematic racism that we've experienced for hundreds of years and the need for that to end now. Now, what's been the way that governments and authorities and employers have dealt with this in the past? And I think we have to be really careful about this, because to my experience, what they do is they try and fall into quick fix mode. They think that a quick fix is going to do everything and it'll dampen down the protests, it'll dampen down people's enthusiasm, and that's all you need to do. So they'll, I don't know, build us a garden somewhere or something, or open up a youth club, or set up a skanky little kind of job creation scheme that's temporary that they'll end when they think everything's all right. I mean, these are the things that they do. We cannot allow that to happen. What we must do is, as other speakers have said, we have to turn what is a particular moment in history into a movement in history, an ongoing movement in history, a movement for fundamental change. Because Labour lost the election in December doesn't alter the fundamental issue here. Fundamental issue is we need an irreversible and fundamental shift in society in favour of working class people. That's the thing that's going to make the difference, actually. And part of bringing about that fundamental change must be the building of a movement that's going to tackle racism, not just for the moment, but going to tackle the systemic racism that's part of the capitalist society in which we live. So I think that's the challenge that we've got. I want to just kind of end with one other point, really. And that is about our terminology. And I want to be really clear. What other people choose to call themselves is what they choose to call themselves. I am black. I'm not BAME. I'm not BEAM. I'm not any of these other things. I am black. And it's a political statement. And the political statement, I think, is really, really important here, because this isn't a moment where we just kind of turn out on the street and it's a random thing. We're turning out on the streets as a political movement designed for political change. And part of that political change must be a clear understanding of our black politics. It's not the colour of our skin, it's the colour of our politics. And we must place that front and centre in this campaign. We must place that front and centre in the movement that we want to create. So I just want to thank everybody for everything that you're doing, but recognise that this is just the start and that we've got a long way to go, and it will be difficult and people will criticise us. They'll find all sorts of new and wonderful and creative ways of criticising us. And I think we just have to understand that we will draw our strength from the solidarity that we've seen tonight and the solidarity that we see on the demonstrations and the campaigns that are taking place, not just in this country, but throughout the world. So solidarity, comrades, keep up the fight.
Solidarity, Roger. Powerful words there, I think. And I think you're absolutely right. We need to be fighting for fundamental change at the moment. I'd just like to announce that at the moment we're on 2.6k viewers, which I think is very good. Please keep sharing. Please keep inviting people to join the rally and the discussion, and let's keep building this. Just to read some comments before I introduce our next speaker. Hannah says police brutality and racism are everyone's problem, and she's absolutely right. And Charlotte says the police must be accountable for their crimes. And then we hear from Yvonne, who said, thanks for all the wonderful speakers. And Pauline says, Anne says, all the speakers are super. So thank you, people, for sharing your comments. Please keep them coming. We want to hear from you, and we want you to be part of the discussion. Now, the next speaker I'd like to introduce is Sabi Dalu, who is the co-convener of Stand Up to Racism. So Sabi, I'd like to hand over to you. What do you want to add to this discussion around Black Lives Matter?
Thank you, Nadia. Firstly, condolences to Charlie, who lost his father recently, and to the family of George Floyd, and all those who have lost loved ones whilst in police custody or in racist attacks. I want to also say solidarity with all Black Lives Matters protesters across the globe, and including in Britain. I heard Priti Patel describe the pulling down of the Edward Colston statue in Bristol as utterly disgraceful, but she didn't condemn slavery while saying that. I think slavery was and is utterly disgraceful. I think racism is and was utterly disgraceful. I think that the government's handling of the coronavirus is utterly disgraceful. I think Priti Patel's immigration bill is utterly disgraceful. And the other thing that I think is utterly disgraceful is the government's attempt to blame Black Lives Matter's protesters on a second wave of the coronavirus. Let's recap what was happening before George Floyd was killed. So we had Black people dying disproportionately in police custody. We have Black people disproportionately affected by unemployment and low pay. And now we're going into the worst recession since the Great Depression. We had one of the worst death tolls in the world. We still do. It was around 60K, according to the Financial Times estimates, and 34% of that were Black people. So that means that 20,000 people that were Black had died before George Floyd was killed. And you had Black doctors and nurses complaining of a lack of PPE more than their white counterparts, and then and died disproportionately as a result of that. And then the government obviously went into lockdown late, as many have said, and then eased the lockdown prematurely. If they kept the lockdown as it was, the stay-at-home message, then daily deaths would have reduced to 0 by around now. But because they eased the lockdown, since the 13th of May, daily deaths have actually been increasing again since the 13th of May, so before George Floyd was killed. So I think we can say it was the government policy that has led to a second wave of coronavirus deaths and infection. And it was the government's herd immunity policy, which they never shifted from, that led to the deaths of 20,000 Black people. So instead of lecturing young protesters that demand change, we demand that the government needs to take action. We demand that police officers that are responsible for deaths in police custody are charged. We demand an end to stop and search. We demand the scrapping of the immigration bill. We demand full citizenship rights for everyone. We want to see the section on institutional racism in the NHS that the government censored out of the Public Health England report. We demand a public inquiry like the Stephen Lawrence inquiry into disproportionate deaths of Black people during the coronavirus. If the government and others want to see an end to the protest, then we need to see some serious action first. That's reasonable. And finally, I just want to say, if you really want to help with our campaigning, what we do is we bring together the movement on the ground, those protesting, with MPs, with trade unions, with faith communities. We bring together a broad alliance against racism. And that's what we need in order to actually build change and get and achieve change. So please donate to Stand Up to Racism. Your donations allow us to affect real change. So please join us, become a member of Stand Up to Racism, give donations and get active in our movement, because we want young Black people leading this movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sabi, and please do donate. We need this money to continue to do what we do. The ruling class have their money. We have the people. We have the people that will keep this campaign going. So please do donate. I am pleased to be introducing our next speaker, which is Dr. Zubaida Hakwi from Runnymede Trust, Interim Director and member of the Independence Age.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for this invitation, Stand Up to Racism. I'm honoured to be here. I'm following inspirational speeches from Sabi, Roxana, Khadisha, Roger, and it's been incredibly poignant hearing from Charlie and Khadisha about her brother. Huge condolences to you both for your loss. In the same year, in 1968, that Enoch Powell launched his extraordinary and vicious speech on the Rivers of Blood, the Rivers of Blood speech, the Runnymede Trust was launched with the motto and with the ambition to nail the lie in racism. 55 years after the first Race Relations Act, we are still nailing the lie in racism. Arguably, we haven't moved forward very much, and arguably, right now, we're even moving backwards. It is extraordinary when you think about the vicious and brutal murder of George Floyd, that the same issues are still pervading society. It is extraordinary to think that Black and ethnic minority people are disproportionately dying with COVID-19, and the same issues link them to the brutal murder of George Floyd. And those issues are, time and time again, that Black and ethnic minority people are over-policed and under-protected, that Black and ethnic minority people are more likely to be suspected than to be given the doubt, that Black and ethnic minority people do not have the same equal rights when it comes to citizenship. When you look at how Black and ethnic minority people are treated, whether it's in education, employment, in the criminal justice system, in the face of police brutality, in the face of public authorities, it's always the same. They are treated as second-class citizens. 55 years later, after the Race Relations Act, it's time for us to demand change. It's time for us to get angry. It's time for us to use our voices and demand that Black and ethnic minority people are given the same rights, the same citizenship rights, because that's where it starts, citizenship rights and equal rights. That's where it starts, and we are not equal. The Windrush scandal, the hostile environment policies, how Black and ethnic minority people have been disregarded and ignored in the recent public health review on racial inequalities and COVID-19 illustrates very starkly that Black and ethnic minority people are not equal, that they are more likely to be ignored and abandoned than protected and looked after. So please join the Runnymede Trust. Please join Stand Up to Racism, and let's fight for a better world where Black and ethnic minority people have equal rights and equal citizenship. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zubaydah. I think what you've had to say has been very informative, and I'm sure a lot of people agree with that as well. And just to read out some of the comments people have left. So Dennis says, let's all watch for when government blames Black Lives Matter protests for reinfection, anything to detract from Dominic Cummings. Becca says that the government has been crap on COVID-19. And I think that vindicates a lot of what's already been said. And Fiona says we need curriculum change and system change. I'd just like to announce for people who've joined midway through the meeting that Diane Abbott will be speaking very soon. So please stay through the meeting and listen to, please stay through the meeting. And so on. I just want to read a final comment before bringing in our next speaker. But we hear from Zoe that they will try to lay the blame on anyone they can deflect from their handling of the COVID-19 crisis. This is talking about the government, of course, and there's much to be said about that as well. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is Claudia Webb, the MP and a long-standing anti-racist activist as well. So Claudia, I'd like to hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a privilege to share a platform with an inspiring range of young people. We are literally all here on our streets, in our parks, on our Zoom, to end the war on Black people, something which is a show of strength for our movement and long overdue. It's a grim testament to the inescapable nature of state-sanctioned racism that viral videos of unarmed African Americans being killed, literally lynched by white police officers, have become tragically commonplace in recent years. Yet even within this depraved normality, the video of George Floyd's death at the hands of Minneapolis uniformed police officers has understandably provoked a wave of revulsion, anger, and revolt amongst Black communities across the world. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. George Floyd's last chilling words have become a slogan of the civil, organized, peaceful protests which have followed his murder. These exact words were the last words spoken by Eric Garner, another unarmed African-American murdered by the police after being accused of selling unlicensed cigarettes. And what was George Floyd's alleged crime which led to that racist police officer kneeling on his neck for 8 minutes, 46 seconds, doing so with his accomplices? Supposedly, George Floyd was cashing a bad check for the value of $20. You know, the petty nature of these alleged wrongdoings bear examining. Whilst gun-toting white supremacist terrorists such as Dylan Roof and Patrick Cusius are peacefully arrested after their racially motivated murderous rampages, unarmed African Americans are murdered by supposed protectors of the peace for the most minor infringements. Unsurprisingly, President Donald Trump, who has a long history of racist comments and actions, responded with rhetoric and threats straight out of the fascist dictatorial playbook. Sadly, this comes as no surprise. This is a president who employs white supremacists and praises heavily armed, predominantly white right-wing protests against coronavirus safety measures, yet gleefully condemns the social outpouring of anger and grief against racist police brutality. You know, the UK government must condemn him if they are really serious about standing up to racism of all kinds wherever it appears in the world. They must also end the sale of so-called anti-riot equipment, including tear gas, rubber bullets, riot shields, and weapons to the US. The violent police response to the US protests is a disgrace, and it would be a disgrace if Britain supplied the equipment that is used to brutally clamp down on those protesting state-sanctioned racism. You know, the contrast between heavily militarized police forces, crushing dissent, and underfunded health services struggling to cope with coronavirus reveal in whose interests societies from the UK to the US really work. You know, the grim intersection of racial and class discrimination has a deadly consequence during this pandemic, and we must topple both these systems of oppression as we rebuild. And in fact, this symbolizes the toppling of the slave trader Edward Colston's statue in Bristol today. I mean, the fact that they have such statues across the UK's inner cities tells you everything you need to know about Britain today. It would rather celebrate its colonial history with statues than teach the truthful education about Africa, about Asia, and about the Caribbean, and the atrocities committed by the British Empire. This lie is done on this industrial scale, of course, needs to be toppled. Martin Luther King said, "A riot is the language of the unheard." And yes, I agree. It's about time we woke up and listened. The fact is that America has been built on the slavery, dispossession and subjugation of the African-American population, and the British Empire was complicit in this. It is crucial to understand the Minneapolis uprising in the context of the centuries of social deprivation and economic extraction that have been endured by African Americans. It's also important to understand what is keeping people on the streets of Britain marching for justice. It's the deep-rooted racial inequality, systematic and structural racism that pass from generation to generation with no end in sight. We are saying, end it now. Get your knee off our neck. You know, as a member of Parliament, I supported the protest by young people in Leicester yesterday, with over 6,000 in attendance, and protests across the country I support. I also attended the Black Lives Matter protests in London earlier this week, and I will continue to support all those across the world who are safely and peacefully protesting systems of racist oppression. Yes, coronavirus kills, but so does racist, state-sanctioned violence. Racism is entrenched in the British state. This is why 3 years on from Grenfell, survivors remain without homes. It's why Mark Duggan was shot and killed by police 9 years ago. And it's why there's no justice for Kingsley Burrell, and why Belle Ribeiro was forced to work in the dangerous conditions that led to her death. I stand in full solidarity with the family, friends and community of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Those of us in the UK cannot ignore yet another death of an unarmed black man in police custody, nor can we ignore the racist incidents of state violence and racism that occur systematically in our country. As the inspiring crowds of protesters around the country have shown us, it is crucial that we in the UK do not assume we are immune from the disease of institutional racism. Black people disproportionately suffer from police use of force in the UK, are more likely to be charged and are overrepresented in the prison population. As in America, it appears that the police can act with impunity as they very rarely face criminal prosecutions. As we have seen with the victims of Grenfell Tower, the Windrush generation, and the disproportionate number of black people who die in police custody, the violence of state-sanctioned racism, and I'll end with this, evidently exists throughout the British political, social, and economic system. So it's up to all of us, wherever we live, who are enraged and saddened by the events of last week, to fight for a world free of class and racial inequalities. As the inspiring radical Angela Davis said, "I'm no longer accepting the things I cannot change. I'm changing the things I cannot accept." That must be our mission going forward, to ensure this is not a moment of passion, and to ensure instead that this moment is a turning point, and that Black Lives Matter evolves from a rallying cry to a reality of daily life. We are right to demand an end to the war against Black lives. Solidarity, solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claudia, for that powerful speech. And I would like just to say, people, please remember to donate to our crowdfund. And with no more ado, I would like to introduce our next speaker, which is Victor Sylvester. Victor Sylvester is the cousin of Roger Sylvester and part of the Roger Sylvester Justice Campaign. So please do welcome Victor Sylvester.
Thank you, and good evening to everyone. As already been said, my name's Victor Sylvester. I'm the cousin of Roger Sylvester, who died at the hands of police. Now, let me tell you a little bit about the story which happened with Roger. On the 11th of January, 1999, that's how long ago it is now, it's 21 years. Roger was restrained by 8 police officers from Tottenham Police Station. He was restrained in St. Anne's Hospital, and his restraint was 25 minutes. He was on the ground with 6 officers on him. In fact, I would call it they were taking shifts. In fact, they actually said that some of the officers were sweating. That's how difficult it was for them. They were restraining Roger, held him down, and he died. And I believe Roger also said, from memory, "I can't breathe," because he couldn't breathe. That was the 11th of January. He was taken away, put into a hospital, and he was on a life support system for a week. I was there on the 18th of January when they switched off the life support system. I remember looking at Roger's face and just seeing one tear coming down. He wasn't able to communicate with us between the 11th and the 18th, because doctors had to check whether or not, before they switched off the life support system, whether or not he was brain dead. So as I said, on the 18th, when they switched off the life support system, I saw that tear, one tear in one eye, running down Roger's eye. And I said, "Roger, you can't hear me, you may not be able to hear me, but we will seek justice." And all the families that I've spoken before of their families and friends who have died in police custody, we are the voice of those people. Roger can't speak for himself. So it had to be myself and his brothers, his sister, his mother, and several other family members who formed the campaign, the Roger Sylvester Justice Campaign, in order to, try and get to the truth of exactly what happened on that night, on the 11th of January, 1999. Anyway, so we formed a campaign, and with all these things, it's sad. One of the worst things is that when somebody dies in police custody, the body doesn't belong to them. It immediately belongs to the state. So we couldn't bury Roger. Some terrible things have happened. The police came out with some horrible stories. The coroner, who is the state's appointed man who determines what the cause of death is, made some horrible statements saying that what the things that Roger had in his blood and all these types of things, made statements that, Roger didn't really die because they asphyxiated him. That's what happened. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't breathe. I have to say it again. Just like the George Floyd story. He can't breathe. They asphyxiate him. They try to look for things in his blood, other causes, underlying conditions. That's the way they handle these things. So as I said, we formed our campaign, and unfortunately, when somebody dies in custody, the first thing that happens is that it goes to an inquest. That's not what we wanted. We wanted the police officers to be charged. No, that doesn't happen. It always has to go to inquest. So the other thing is, it's always another police service which investigates the death of somebody. So in our case, it was Essex Police. So Essex Police investigated, and after a 10-month investigation, it went to the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, and they said they weren't going to change. They weren't going to charge the officers, and we'll have to wait for the outcome of an inquest. So yes, we went to an inquest. 4 years later, in 2003, October 2003, we went to an inquest. And in the inquest, we heard the evidence. We heard what happened. We heard what exactly happened in that room in St. Anne's Hospital, how the police killed my cousin. I can say that, they killed him, all right? After a month in the inquest, we were granted unlawful killing. Now that's very rare in police deaths in custody. We were granted unlawful killing. Now, obviously, that's when they suspended the 8 police officers. Up until that time, they were still in active service. So they had 4 years in active service. Okay, so they get suspended, and what happens next in the court service? They appeal. So we had to go through appeal court in 2004. A year after we got the unlawful killing, we went to appeal, and in the High Court, they decided they're going to overturn the verdict because of a technicality, as they say. Well, there's always a technicality, always a technicality. Overturned because of a technicality, and the 8 police officers got their jobs back. And to this day, as far as I know, they're still working, So I think my time is up. I could have said a lot more, but I'd like to congratulate all the other people that have spoken about their parents, their loved ones who've died in custody, all the fights. It's a melting pot. It's a soup. Racism is a disease. It's a disease that needs to be got rid of, right? And the incident was happening with George, George Floyd. We know it's caused something. It's caused a stirring in the world. People are demonstrating in Australia for the indigenous people, New Zealand, all over the world, people are demonstrating, and that's great. And in particular, it's young people. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victor, and solidarity to you and all the family of people who are fighting for justice, all the families who are fighting for justice from the states who've had their loved ones taken away by the police or the state. I think you're absolutely right. You know, racism is a disease, and it is, you know, incredibly inspirational to see what's happened in the States has just sparked actually an unleashing of anger at all the different elements of and aspects of racism and so on, and people are fed up and want real change. So thank you for what you've said in the time that you have. I'd just like to read out some more comments that people have sent in. So Louise Raw says 500 Black and ethnic minority people dead in police custody from 1990 to 2015 alone. And Hamza says UK must stop all arms sales to the US. Bethany says Roger Sylvester, rest in peace. And we all agree with her on that one. And Dr. Zubaydah has also come in saying moving, passionate and heartfelt speech. Thank you. Now, I'm really glad to be bringing in our penultimate speaker. We have next Wayman Bennett, who is the co-convener, one of the co-conveners of Stand Up to Racism. So Wayman, over to you.
I want to start off by sending my condolences to all the families that have spoken on here and giving solidarity to all the people that are fighting around the world to make sure that Black Lives Matter and that we fight against racism. And I want to start off by saying I saw Priti Patel talking about criminal behavior. And let's be absolutely clear, there's a criminal in the White House who talks about he wants to militarize and shoot people who are calling for justice. Racism is not an accident, it's a systematic thing, and it comes from the top of our society. When Boris Johnson described Black people as having watermelon smiles and grinning pickaninnies, that's the Prime Minister. When the President of the United States starts talking about when looting starts, shooting starts, and using segregationist talk and talk about polarized, and as a man called Steve Bannon, as one of his advisors, who said that when you call somebody calls you a racist, or when somebody calls you a Nazi or a fascist, wear it as a badge of pride. Racism comes from the top of our society and is sustained there. Unless that is challenged, do not tell us about throwing down the statue. That statue should have been dashed away a long time ago. It's been there. It's a criminal act against everybody inside of those people. I support their right to throw that statue in the river. In fact, there's many more that need to be thrown in the river as well. And when we talk about criminal activity, how can it not be a criminal act when you have the people at the top of our society who've presided over 50 to 60,000 deaths, 20,000 deaths of Black and brown people, and they say that they talk about criminal activity. In fact, a report came out that said the lockdown should have started earlier. And actually, Mr. Hancock, whose name is misspelt, you should have a D in his name, has said that he didn't think that the lockdown started later. Well, tell that to the dead. Tell that to the people who would never see their loved ones again, because we have two R's to fight. We have the fight against racism, and we have also the fight against coronavirus and the attempt of a cover-up about why that crisis happened. And actually, we have double laws. We have somebody called Michael Gove, who openly admits that he took cocaine. And he said he's very sorry he took cocaine, and therefore he forgives himself, and the British state forgives himself. If you were in Tottenham or you're in Brixton, it's not that you get forgiven, you get a prison sentence. And actually, you do not ask for the highest office in the land, and then you get away with it. The people at the top of our society use racism to divide and rule. As Frederick Douglass said, they divide each to conquer both. They're using racism to misdirect people according to the real problems. And that's what's the beauty of the Black Lives Matter movement. It is led by Black people, but it's a mixed, multiracial movement. It's a multi-faith movement. And we should never forget, when they attempt to divide us, how they do it. They use the hostile environment in order to start by attacking Muslims, actually. They use Islamophobia. They said they're worried about what Muslim women wore on their head. Now everybody wears a mask. Now everybody's un-British. The truth of it is, the heart of it was not about the mask, it was about what was underneath it. It's about systematic racism, the attempt to blame people and misdirect people. And I think the Etonians, let's look at the Bullingdon Club. They smashed up things. But what happens when you, in the Bullingdon Club, if you go to Eton and you go to Oxbridge, you end up being the Prime Minister. And actually that sustaining of a system which was built on slavery, the backgrounds of all those people was built on wealth and exploitation of people. I say to people when they say, what are we about? It's by any means necessary. We want an inquiry. And when Priti Patel says, are we going to stay quiet? We want people to take the knee on Wednesday. We want people to protest. Keep protesting. It is the tradition. If they want to talk about an old English tradition, it's a tradition of the suffragettes. It's a tradition of the Chartists. It's a tradition that gave us our rights. It's a tradition of the gay liberation movement. It's our tradition of women's rights. It comes out of the means where you stand up. That's why Rosa Parks took a seat so that we could stand up for what's going wrong in our society. And actually, when you look at it, the way that racism comes across with class tells you something else. 1 in 5 people who work in the NHS are from BAME or black backgrounds. And when I talk about being politically black, I mean politically black when I talk about BAME. 2/3 of the deaths consequence were of black people. On April, 72% of all the people that had died had come from black or BAME communities. And actually what was clear was they were deprived of PPE. That's a criminal offense. That's a criminal offense to deliberately send people into battle without the means of being able to protect themselves against a deadly disease, which you knew about, and you did nothing about. I think that when you look at it, look at the way that when they say that can't explain why black people are dying, it's to do with vitamin D. It's actually to do with something very, very simple. It's to do with inequality. It's to do with wealth inequality. If you're Bangladeshi, you're 15 times more likely to be in a situation where you're put together. If you're Pakistani black, 6 to 7 times. It's to do with the most deprived areas have got the highest death rates. And that's the reason why when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we have to talk about the means of being able to resist and fight for change. On Wednesday, take a knee and raise your fist in the air. Stand Up to Racism is trying to do something else. We want to resist, but we don't want the resistance to go. I'll be clear, every single time we've defeated racists or fascists, I remember 10 years ago, marching against the BNP and also later on marching against the EDL. So when President Trump says that anti-fascism is a terrorist act, the real terrorists are the racists and the fascists. And actually those people are getting far too much leeway and far too much being normalized. The Windrush generation paid the price for the hostile environment. And we have to make sure that we make sure that there's a difference for people now. And what we want people to do is to sign up for the call for public inquiry, call local demonstrations, take a knee, but also something else. I want to salute the trade unions for doing something. It may have been partially lost, but don't forget, Boris Johnson said he was going to open the schools. No schools were opened on the scale that he talked about because the trade unions and black organizations said, you're not going to send us to our deaths. We're going to boycott, we're going to strike, we're going to organize against you. Those same weapons should be used to defend the Black Lives Matter movement. Nobody should go to prison for standing up against racism. The people that should go to prison are the racists and the people that murder black people and the police that have been involved in the murder of black people. Those are the people that should go to prison, and those are the people that we should stand up against. And I think we also have to understand this is a question of power, and I'll end up on this. We have to understand that it's not enough just to have people who say that they represent us. I'm so glad that we have Claudia, Diane, and Belle and Ribeiro, but there's a lot of people that have been silent about what's going on in terms of actual opposition to the other opposition. They should speak up. And we need people to speak up for us. And we do not need people that are forced leaders like Trevor Phillips, who decides to attack Muslim organizations in order to divide us. We need unity if we're going to talk about a key way of fighting back today. My final message is we are at the beginning of this movement, of a movement where people have taken to the streets, where they fight inside their workplaces, where they fight wherever they are. And I think this rebellion has got to be part of that rebellion that does fundamentally do something about changing racism. We don't want just another report. We don't want just a movement that goes up and goes down. We need a continuous fight to make sure that Black Lives Matter and that what we do is have unity and solidarity with everyone. So thank you very much for joining us. Solidarity with all the other people that have spoken, and let's make sure that we have real change. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Wayman, for that powerful speech. Please do remember every Wednesday to take a knee and to donate to our crowdfund. We've no longer overdue. I would like to introduce Diane Abbott, MP. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Diane.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I mean, you've heard some brilliant speeches this evening. I just, first of all, wanted to give my solidarity to everyone who was out demonstrating this weekend. For health reasons, I have been shielding ever since the lockdown, but I want to give my condolences to all the bereaved families at this meeting, and I want to offer solidarity to all of the people who've taken peacefully to the streets. And I agree with everything that's been said, but I want to reinforce the message that institutional racism and police brutality is not just an issue for America. The history of empire, the history of British slaveholders like Bristol's Edward Colston, and the history of colonialism is an intrinsically violent one. We have people at this meeting from all corners of the British Empire, and we could have a whole meeting on that. In 1985, the original Tottenham riots were caused by the death of Cynthia Jarrett after a police raid on her home. We've heard earlier in this meeting about the deaths of so many Black people in custody. The thousands of BAME deaths from COVID is a form of violence. With hundreds of other MPs, including my friends Claudia Webb and Belle Ribeiro, we've written to the government to call for an end to exporting rubber bullets and tear gas to the US, because we should not be aiding and abetting Trump in repressing his own people. And I've heard Tory MPs over the weekend saying people shouldn't go out and demonstrate for safety reasons. Police violence is a threat to the safety of Black people, particularly Black men internationally. And it's right to demonstrate against that. I wanted to say that, as well as offering my solidarity to the families, the bereaved families, I was pleased and proud to hear from Barney, the Cambridge activist. That's my uni town. Never had demos like that in my time. Respect to all the young people everywhere who are taking the struggle forward. We need an independent public inquiry into Black deaths from COVID. We need to show solidarity with the protesters and ignore the biased media coverage. And we want to tell the society, all of us, whether we can be on the street, whether we are online, whether we are working on campaigns, whether we're in Parliament, that no justice, no peace, and Black Lives Matter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Diane, for joining us and for those words. And as somebody, perhaps people might be able to guess, who has taken part in these Black Lives Matter protests in London. You know, we appreciate your solidarity and support for young people's fight for justice and things to change. And really, I'd like to thank all of our speakers who've joined us this evening with their powerful words, especially the relatives of those fighting for justice for family members. I think it's been a brilliant meeting with just under 3,000 people watching across YouTube and Facebook. So do use this once this is uploaded to share with friends and so on, so we can start rolling out and pushing out a movement against racism and so on. I'd just like to make one announcement, and that is, or two announcements actually. First of all, for people to like, comment, and share, the Stand Up to Racism Facebook page and follow what's going on there, and also join Stand Up to Racism as well. If you're not a member already, there is going to be an activist meeting coming up very soon, and we'd like people to engage with that. You can see the details over there. Well, they're gone now, but for how you can get involved and donate and so on. I'd also like to announce that now every Wednesday, Stand Up to Racism has called it as a day of action for people to take the knee in their local areas and so on. We saw brilliant photographs across the country last Wednesday, and we had some report packs today of people who have taken part in local action. If you want to find out what's happening locally to you, or you want to be part of setting up something, then please do get in contact with us and share what you do get up to with Stand Up to Racism, and check out your local group. But again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. And yeah, take care, stay safe. Black Lives Matter.